I can speak for all of us that we have a lot of questions for the PluralSight team in general. And just so I'm sure everyone knows their names, but just to kind of line item out who they are. Aaron's the CEO, obviously, and then Brian is over the UX, and David is over all the product, and Amy is a developer. So we're happy to have you guys all here with us. I wanted to ask Aaron just to give us a quick overview of what PluralSight does and the team and the structure.
Yeah, just really quick, PluralSight is an online learning platform for developers, IT, and creative professionals. We acquire content from industry experts from all over the world. We publish that into an online library that's accessible through our website, through mobile apps, and a variety of other channels. And then we sell subscriptions to both individuals and businesses to learn through this platform. And that's basically the business model in a nutshell. And within the company, the interesting thing, we've gone through a lot of evolution and development around that's got us to where we are today, which I think we'll talk about here in this session. And it's all happened within the last couple of years. And today, all of our product engineering and content development sits within one organization that we now call our experience group at PluralSight, that encapsulates basically everything that the user, the customer, touches when interacting with our product. And that's led by Nate Walkinshaw, who's our Chief Product Officer, actually now the Chief Experience Officer at PluralSight, who's sitting right up here in the front. Why don't you raise your hand? Yes. That's him right there. Is that good?
Yes, I think that's a good overview. What I wanted to jump right into is, I think we've all heard a little bit about directed discovery, so I wanted to kind of bring up this overview of directed discovery, and I wanted to ask David here to kind of give us an overview of like what it is for those people that don't know what directed discovery is.
Sure. I don't know if any of you guys were here last year. I'm guessing a lot of you were. We talked a little bit more about directed discovery, and you heard Kyle this morning talk about kind of one phase of it. But what you see on the board behind me is really all of the steps that go into figuring out what we should go and build and what it should look like and how it should work, and making sure it works on the release side of the process. So the way directed discovery works, it's really kind of a dual track system. We have continuous discovery and we have continuous delivery as well. And that allows us to go and spend a lot of time with our users, really kind of a user-centered focus, while the dev team working with us on discovery is also putting features into the ecosystem, and we're testing them through that whole process. So if you think of a company like Toyota and Toyota's Toyota production system, we're a lot like that. Directed discovery is our version of how we work every single day and accomplish the things that we do. And I think we'll talk a lot about the specifics of that here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, so the first question I have is directed discovery like ingrained in everything that you do, or only parts of the organization practices it?
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say it's actually it started out in the product group, in the actual software and the features that our users interact with, but it's managed to creep its way into all the different parts of our organization. I think Mariah mentioned this morning that we use directed discovery for the content part of our organization as well, so it's continuing to kind of spread its fingers into all the different parts.
I'd say, to add to that, we've gone through an awakening as a business over the last few years around, the importance of having the user at the center of everything that we do. If you looked at PluralSight 3 years ago, we barely talked to our customers. We thought we knew a lot about them, because the founders are all developers, and that's who we're selling our product to primarily. And so we thought we were pretty in tune with what they needed and what they wanted, but we rarely talked to them, and we rarely looked at our product through their eyes. And so there was a moment in time a few years ago where we realized as a company that we had to pivot in a pretty significant way. It became apparent to us that we were missing something pretty significant here on this front. And that was when we went out looking for a product leader who would know how to bring us that discipline. And that was when we were first introduced to directed discovery through Nate. And it just all made complete sense. It was like once he presented it to me and explained how this would work, it's like this light bulb went off, And I realized there's something really, really powerful here because of how it's going to change the culture of the company. And then over the next 6 months, it was pretty magical to watch how that changed everyone's perspective within the organization and how quickly it was able to get the organization aligned so that all the different roles that are represented here on the stage were able to think about and talk about the problem in the right way and have complete alignment around what's really going to give value to our customer in the end. And as we've watched that unfold, to David's point, we've actually noticed that there's a lot of opportunities to use that same process outside of just product. So our content team is now starting to use these same principles. Even other groups like marketing are looking at it and saying, how can we use these same principles there? And that's one of the reasons why we ended up kind of grouping product, content, and engineering under one organization, was because of the alignment this provides. And I think it will continue to provide a renewed customer focus across the whole company over time.
Okay. I think that's great. How do you guys work as a team? Like, how does this directed discovery focus the whole team into, or is it focused throughout the whole team? Or is it just a part of the product that then trickles down? Or how does the process work?
I'll take this one.
Yes.
Is this on? So we all work together on it. And David and I are paired up as a couple. So he's leading out with product. And yeah, sorry, Mary. And then we're also paired up with a development team. And so we embark out from the beginning with directed discovery, whatever projects we may have.
Could you give us an example of like what that team looks like, of who? Because we've only got 4 of you up here, but
yeah,
like what does a holistic team look like?
So a holistic team is a product manager, a UX designer, and then about 5 developers on the team. And then we're also paired up with the content team and the parts that hit that team, along with any other parts of the organization that we need to bring along so that they can understand what we're trying to get to as well.
Okay, I didn't mean to derail you there, but
no.
If you can continue to like, do you want to?
I was just going to add, we also have a DevOps engineer on each team as well.
Okay.
That's right.
So kind of continue to tell us how like the process of going through the VOC and the customer, the CPT. I mean, I think you guys have acronyms for each one of those. How does that play into each of your roles?
Yeah, so I'll start. So we do have a bunch of acronyms back there. The first part of our process is really about discovery, and that actually starts with personas. It's really important that we understand who we're actually building for, and I think once we had a good grasp of that, we started looking into this kind of process of voice of the customer, where we interview our users around ideas that we have, and we talk with them, and it's really just a way for us to explore what it is that they're looking for, how they think something should work. There's a pretty specific process that we go through in that. But I think the biggest change for me from other places that I've worked, and the thing that's been the most important, is that Brian and myself and Amy, or somebody else from the development team, is on every single one of those calls. We have a pretty strict rule that if we are going to do a VOC or a customer preference test, which is kind of the next step, one person from each discipline needs to be there. And if they're not there, we cancel the call. And we also do those every single day. So we're talking to a user at least once a day, usually for an hour, about the specifics of a feature that we're building. But we're never doing it by ourselves. So the whole team has an understanding of what we're trying to build. So
I'm curious from Amy's viewpoint. I don't know many developers that are required to be included in a user interview or a user test. They're usually delivered that type of information later on from someone else. How many tests are you involved in, like on a weekly basis? Yeah, so it really depends on what work my team has coming up and what features we're building, and so during some periods, about 9 months ago, I'd be on a call twice a week. Lately, it's not been as much because we are working on fixing,
incremental improvements. So it's not, the stuff we're building isn't going through this directed discovery as much right now. It's not deep in it, but yeah, I when there's stuff that our team is working on, I'll be on a call once a week, and we just kind of rotate through the developers on the team when you're on a call. And as far as what that's like as a developer, I think it's great. It was a really big improvement, I think, when Nate and his crew came over, because we, as developers, we're also kind of we're also customers for our product, and so it's really fun to see from putting that hat on, but also putting the developer hat on and going through that process. And it's also really beneficial to be involved early in the process so that we don't have product and UX designing something that's not feasible. So we can give that feedback early on and say, hey, these designs that we're looking at, if we tweak them just a little bit, it would be, a lot easier to build. And maybe that's worth testing, because if we're looking at 2 months to build versus 2 weeks or something and making up numbers, but it's really helpful to have that information early on in the process as well.
Right. So Brian, are you, in the voice of the customer, there's personas and stories and themes. Can you guys talk to those pieces? Are you defining the personas, and then David is creating the user stories, or are you doing that together? How does that work?
So on the personas, when we first arrived as a product team, we knew that we had to establish that right away so that we could understand who our users were. And so as a product team, we created those together. And then over time, the different teams have perfected them and refined them so that as we understand them and get to know them more, we can vet them out more and have it more explicit as far as who they are and who we've identified them to be. As far as the user stories go, and the themes and the steps and all of those things on a voice of customer, all of us are there all along the way, because it's really important that each of us have that experience.
Can you explain what a theme is?
So a theme, so we'll get in a room, or we'll get the team together, and we know that we have to build a certain feature or a certain part of the product. And so we'll take down what we think our assumptions are, and then we'll have everyone go through user stories. And so everyone will take the time and they'll start writing out this story based on a theme. And so as they're writing the stories down, these themes are starting to be created, and these features are starting to be defined.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
this process actually happens after we've done voice of the customer calls, where we've all been a part of them. So it might be 5 calls or 10 calls or 15 calls. So we're writing down the narrative and the themes based on the things that we've learned through that whole process, not just because we think we know what it is, but because we actually learned what it is based on those calls. But because not everybody is on every single call, like Amy mentioned, we rotate through the developers. What we end up with is this really great base of kind of creative thinking around what the narrative really is for a feature that we think we need to go, or an experience that we need to go and build. And that's what this process is.
So then we continue that process, and we go down where we create all of these stories, and then we go around the room and we have everyone talk about what their thoughts are or their stories that they've written down. And so as these stories unfold, we start to see themes, because what I write down and what Amy writes down and David, we all might write the same theme. And then we'll start to collect that information once everybody's shared their story, and we'll start grouping that information. And so we'll come to a really quick and clear understanding of what it is that we're going to go start to design.
And that kind of speaks
build.
to the details aspect of that. Okay, so as you refine those down, they become the details of the actual MVP that would be presented.
Yeah,
Correct?
once we collect everybody's knowledge and stories and ideas, and we go through as a team and decide, okay, this is what we think the story really includes, and here's what we think the minimum viable product is. The first thing, we call them skateboards. Here's what the skateboard is going to be, the first thing we can go and deliver, and all those things bubble to the top. And there's actually a really fun step, if you don't mind me mentioning it. We make everybody draw it. we hand out paper and Sharpies and say, go draw this experience that we just defined on sticky notes, and we collect and look through all of the different designs that everybody in the room, so we have developers drawing the same thing that Brian is drawing, and Brian makes them really pretty, and I make them look really not very much at all. But it's a great way to collect all the collective knowledge from the team and all those ideas, and more often than not, what the developers are drawing ends up being something that falls into the product when we go and actually start doing designs for it.
I just wanted to jump in here. I think a lot of companies fall into the trap of, is it an effective or efficient use of time to have all these different roles involved in each of those steps of the process, or should we keep the developers slinging code while product is figuring out the designs, and so we get more kind of resource efficiency back out of the system? And I think that is a short-sighted look at the whole system, because the thing that we've experienced as a company is the working through that process as a team is what actually creates the alignment that your cross-functional teams need to move really quickly towards delivering value to your customer, which is flow efficiency. So we opt to make strategic decisions as a company that lean more towards flow efficiency over resource efficiency. And so when there's time, when these debates come up, I think that's an effective way to have that conversation as a group.
Just while we're on you, what is your involvement with these decisions? Like, do you come in at certain checkpoints, or are you just as, well, I'm sure you're not as deep as these guys in it.
Yeah, no, I'm almost not involved, which is fantastic.
Wonderful.
We have a really strong product leader, and what we do as a leadership team is we think about corporate strategy and directionality for the product. So there's certain key themes that we'll talk about and prioritize in our meetings, and we'll talk with Nate and his group about how to think about prioritizing some of these things. So there's some discussion at that level of those big items. And then we might go to the team and say, okay, guys, we need to figure out how to deliver learning paths in our product. This is the theme we keep hearing about from our customers, it's coming in from sales and marketing, it's coming in from some of the work in Directive Discovery. And then we really trust the team to figure out how to go deliver the skateboard of that feature, and then how it's going to evolve from there, because they're the ones that are talking to the customer. And we try to stay, at the right level of involvement to not disrupt the process, because the process, when working really well, I think is pretty efficient.
Yeah.
I will add, though, that there was a time last year that Aaron grabbed me and Nate and pulled us into a room and was like, all right, I want to see all the stuff that you've done so far. And this room happens to have a fireplace in it, and I was backed up against the fireplace when he was asking things like, well, why did you make this decision, and what happened right here? And had to back all that up with all the data from our research and all the calls that we did. And at the end, he asked me how confident I was in that, and I gave him a number. And he was like, that's pretty good. And he hasn't done that since, so I think we sold him on the idea on that particular day.
That's about right.
Wonderful. So there is the 2 days, 2 weeks, 1 month aspect. Can you guys speak to that piece of efficiency, and how is that included in just the voice of the customer, or is that throughout the whole process? And how does that work?
Yeah, so the 2 weeks, 2 days, 1 month thing is really what we think about when we're looking at what the MVP is. So coming out of that narrative building session, we're trying to decide, how much time do we want to spend getting something in front of the user? How big is this experience? How much time do we need to spend? And we might decide that the MVP or the skateboard can be something that we go get done in 2 weeks, and then we push it out, and then maybe 2 weeks later we get something else. This is not a sprint sort of situation at all. We are Kanban, so we just keep going. We don't have that kind of scheduled development. But it's really just up there as a representation that we have the ability to make a decision about how much we want to go and do based on the value that we want to deliver for the users.
So Amy, what's going through your head as you go through this whole process where it's not even actual writing of any code? Like, what's going through your head as you go through this process with them? Are you planning on how that's structured, or thinking how it's going to be built along those lines? I'd love
Yeah,
to.
definitely. I mean, we're, at least me personally as a developer, I'm always thinking in terms of code or architecture. And so, yeah, as we see the experiences and stuff, we're definitely thinking about, roughly how are we going to build this thing, and so we can bring that to the table to discuss about how do we decide what's an MVP.
Okay, cool.
Can I ask one thing here? Do you think it's changed your level of empathy for the customer as a developer? Like, talk to that a little bit, because that was one of the big theories when we went into this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I kind of already had being a customer of our product. I think that was a big strength working at PluralSight. But talking to our customers definitely improved at least my empathy and understanding of the customer. My favorite calls to be in were the ones where we were discovering what our personas were, because we got deep into people's personal details. And it was just really fun to see, other people that are using our product. What are they like? What are their passions? What are their goals in life? And it's certainly helped even since then, and the continued calls we're on, to be able to have that background.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone in the room, I'd like everyone to just think for a second about how many debates you've been in about what's going to be best for the customer in the end. Like these ideological debates between product and engineering that often happen. And that is really what I'm talking about when we talk about alignment and getting to efficiency. When you're in the room, I mean, and I've watched a lot of these, the cool thing about this, when it starts to work, and we've had weeks where we've had, dozens of these happening, we can actually watch them because they're all recorded. And so, it's pretty interesting to see how it changes everyone's perspective. And then you don't have to have the debate because you heard it and you felt it, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is why this is so valuable to the customer. And that's why I think I've actually never asked Nate why it's called directed discovery, but I think it's a directed way, to actually discover the value. We don't do exactly what the customers ask us to do. I think this is a key point. We're discovering how to deliver that value to them. And so our teams then take all that input, those data points, and then they come up with their theories, their designs that they think will deliver that value. Then we go test it again. So I think this alignment point can't go underemphasized because it's super powerful.
Right, and if we do start having debates, because we still have those, but if we do, we can either go back to the calls that we've had and answer them, or we'll say, let's ask our customers. We have a call coming up in an hour. Let's ask them.
Totally.
So what's not working right now, or what are like the biggest pain points? This is a question from the audience, by the way. What's not working right now? What are the biggest pain points? What are you learning and improving on right now?
Yeah, I'll start. Because I got a couple of things.
Got a list. Why did you look at me?
I have a few things to say on this.
I don't get to work really as closely with Brian anymore, and that's not working for me right now.
But the relationship. Oh no.
There's actually, what I've learned in the last, call it a year and a half, we as an organization, we as a team, a product team especially, have gotten amazing at what we do every single day. It's getting on the calls, it's synthesizing the things that we learn, it's churning out, revisions on our designs and getting ready for the next call. We're like really great at that. At least I think so. But the thing that we still are challenged by a little bit is as our experiences have gotten more complicated and they start crossing boundaries from this team to another team, or from one persona to another, or from one code base to another, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen there. So it's coordination all the way from the first voice of the customer interviews. We're trying to learn what everybody needs. So in our world, imagine, Kyle talked about the planner side. The planner wants to go influence the way the learner sees the site for some reason, and the learner has to see that. There's like 2 or 3 teams that are involved with all of that, and the coordination across the discovery and the delivery and the release cycle, those things, as we've just started building more complicated things, are things that we're working on right now. We don't have it dialed yet, but we're doing pretty well.
Okay. Another question from the audience is, 5 hours a week is a huge amount of time on the phone with customers. How do you find such a steady stream of people to talk to? Do you worry about exhausting your customer base? And do you incentivize customers to spend time so much of their time talking to you?
I don't think 5 hours is enough, actually. It's really enjoyable to talk to the customers, and I had 6 last week, and every one of them were very appreciative of us taking the time and reaching out to them, and they almost become addicted to it, where they want to keep participating because they've seen the product change over the last year, and they know that we're listening to them, and so they really appreciate us taking that time and putting that effort in to reach out to them. Kyle had also mentioned this morning in his presentation that we use an app called Web Engage, and we get a lot of feedback from customers there, and that's one way that we reach out to our customers and contact them to set up those interviews and talk to them about what we're learning and what they want to share with us.
We don't use incentives, do we? For the customers?
Nope. Yeah, and we don't use incentives. So this is all just their willingness on their own free time out of their life to talk to us. So it's.
Do we get these from sales, marketing? Who's teeing up the people?
Yeah, most of the, I'll speak on the individual user side. We pretty much just spam people out of the user base. And we have a lot of those people, so it's okay. And response rate isn't particularly high, but it's enough to get us at least 5 calls a week, which is great. And I think in 200 calls last year, I had one person say almost offhand, like, hey, it would be really cool if I could have a free month. And I think I responded like, oh, we don't typically do that. And he was like, okay, I was just kind of asking. But we get people who are super excited to talk to us. And to Brian's point, they do frequently say, hey, I'd really love to do this again. And we don't typically recycle people because we want to get kind of new, fresh faces and fresh perspectives all the time. It's a little bit harder on our plan admin side where the population isn't quite as big, and it's a little harder to get those people, but the same conditions apply, right? There's not incentives that we're giving to them, and they're really excited when they see something that they mentioned to us show up in the product a little while later. I think Kyle gets emails pretty regularly from people who are like, hey, we talked about this, and now it's a feature. That's really freaking cool. You guys listen to us. We get that in almost any forum that we have, whether it's our mobile app reviews on the Play Store or in iTunes or on Twitter. Hey, they actually listened to what I said to them, and I'm one of some 100,000 number of users, and my feature showed up. That's really cool.
And then with some of the enterprise customers, there's a higher touch approach that's used, where we might actually go face to face. I know Nate has done this with some of his team. Where they'll actually go to the customer, or we'll hold an enterprise micro event somewhere where they actually whiteboard with the customers. It could be considered part of this process, but it takes a slightly different shape, and all that input kind of comes into the system.
I'd love to hear Amy's input on the 5 hours of spending time with users and how that affects development time and getting the work done and shipped, actually.
Yeah, so it's not 5 hours for each developer because we rotate through. So,
okay.
On average, it's probably an hour, probably actually less than that for each developer. And I think it depends on each person's schedule. But for me, it's often a welcome break just because it's so rewarding to talk to our customers. And that might sound a little cliche, I guess, but it really is enjoyable. And so it doesn't feel like a distraction to me. It feels like getting to the heart of what we're doing.
Every time I watch one of these things, it brings me energy. And so I think Nate's torn about whether or not to actually put them in front of me or not, because I'll go watch one, he'll be like, oh, this one's just gold, you gotta go watch this one. I'll go watch it, then I'll have all these ideas where he's like, no, stay away, I just wanted you to see this thing. We're fine. But
is Nate really filtering them to you?
Well, they really do bring, if you really care about what you're doing, and then you see these customers and what they talk about in these things, it brings. I would love to hear from you guys how it impacts your joy in work, because for me it brings a lot of that.
For me as a designer, the thing I love about Directive Discovery is it actually provides me a path of where I need to go with the design. In years past, before Directive Discovery, I always felt like I was in a black hole or not really knowing what I was trying to design. And I think a lot of us probably out in the audience can attest to that same experience. But Directive Discovery When you start with the voice of the customer and you start down that path and then you get to customer preference test, it just gets more clear as you continue to work on things. And the more customers you talk to, the more insights you gain as to what they want, and you start hearing things repeated over and over from customers. And then it's so clear. You're like, this is exactly what they want.
So we've been talking a lot about the actual interviews that you do with people, but there's the measure qualitative and quantitative data that feeds into that. How do you balance the input from actual people and interviews that you're doing as well as the data, and is that collected and managed all throughout the process, or is that just tacked on at the end, and is it delivered by development, or
yeah,
how's that work?
It kind of comes in different phases, right? So when we're doing voice of the customer interviews, it's literally the three of us and a person, and all we're doing is talking. We're not looking at anything. We're not collecting any other sort of data. When we get into the second stage, which is customer preference testing, when we're actually taking designs that came out of the narrative building session, which came out of the voice of the customer calls. Now it's the three of us and a person and a prototype. And it might be a paper prototype, it might be something that's clickable, and we're still not collecting any other data because we haven't even built anything yet. No, not a single line of code has been written at that point. So we're going through and having all these calls, and we've learned so much in VOCs that we come up with these designs, and sometimes they're close, and sometimes where we get to iteration 30, which is one that we did recently, we don't always get it right out of the gate. So then it isn't until it's actually in that alpha, beta period that Kyle talked about that we're collecting that kind of data. So really we're getting just straight commentary from the people who are looking at everything till we feel really comfortable and we think we've got the right thing, and then we go and build it, and that's when we start collecting that other more data at scale. And so far we've done a pretty decent job.
Okay.
Maybe we're just
another
lucky.
question from the audience. What is the prioritization process like, and who does it? Is it prioritized at a macro level and then executed at the team level? Or does each team maintain and prioritize its opportunities and backlogs themselves based on product vision and objectives?
I'll start with kind of the executive view of this, and then I'd love to hear your views on this. So what we have a quarterly process as a team for developing our company playbook. So the key thing is we try to keep things really simple company-wide, so everyone in the company can understand what's important to the company right now from a strategy perspective, and what are some of the key defining objectives or themes, if you will, that we need to focus on company-wide for that quarter. And these are things that we want to accomplish during the quarter and actually be able to see progress against and in many cases complete in that period of time. And so as a company, the leadership team does an offsite, usually 2 to 3 days every quarter, where we're huddled looking at all the data, all the input from the teams that feed into that. We actually ask everyone in the company to provide inputs into that process before we go into that decision-making cycle. And then we come back and we have a one-page document that says, here are the things that are important. And that's really the handoff then to the organizations within the company for them to then look at those themes and defining objectives and figure out what do we do to execute against that in this quarter. I'd love to hear how you guys then think about it from there.
I think the first thing I'd add is that those defining objectives are not prescriptive at all. And it leaves the team with a lot of autonomy to go and figure out how we're going to make progress against those objectives. So our process on the product side, after picking it up from the executive and the leadership team, is okay, how are we going to go make progress against this thing? And that kicks off the whole process inside of the teams. I'll let you guys talk.
Sure, I'll take that. So we meet as a team. We have I don't know if I call it quarterly planning, but that's basically what it is, where we're just trying to decide as a team what things we're going to try to tackle that quarter. And again, it's not a commitment. We're not setting deadlines, but we're really trying to figure out what our team priorities are. And so we take what we got from our leadership team, and we try to figure out, okay, what's our role in these company objectives, and what's the most important thing. And so we'll bring those things from the product side and and then weigh that with technical things that need to be taken care of as well, like technical debt or operational excellence kind of items. And so then we come out with a list of our priorities as a team, and we revisit those often as we have, like my team, we have a weekly planning meeting where we set our priorities for that week on our Kanban board. And so we'll just take a look at that sheet, and sometimes we change things. Sometimes things come up. Like just recently, we had a team that was like, "Hey, we're building this thing, and it's a company objective for the quarter, and there's something our team needs to do to take care of that. So we have to juggle our priorities." So it's an ongoing thing.
So the company-wide objectives end up helping break kind of ties, if you will. Like they're the tiebreakers. Like if you have two things that both seem like they're important, the company objective, if it's aligned with the strategy, should be something that will trump in those situations. But in the end, the teams are defining their priorities and their daily work. Like that's not coming down from my seat. And there will be things that come up. Like we had a big deal with a big enterprise customer last year that was worth $7 million. And to get that deal across the finish line, we had to go execute something that was not in the plan, wasn't in the quarterly plan, wasn't in the annual plan. And we had to say, okay, how are we going to adapt here? And it ended up impacting almost all of the product teams in some way. But when you execute with this kind of process, you're not in a big waterfall cycle. You're because of the lean approach that this gives you, you're able to kind of make those pivots, I think, pretty effectively.
Wonderful. There was another question from the audience about the tests. Are there standard questions that you ask all the customers? Do you mostly run wireframes past them during the sessions? What's a typical session like? Maybe Brian could speak to that.
I can take that. So our wireframes are pretty much high fidelity. We have learned that we can move a lot faster if we just go into those tests with a high fidelity comp or mock. And what David and I would do, or now I'm working with Matt Merrill, we usually have like, we got divorced, but anyway, we'll have kind of like a 5-minute thing that we go through with the customer. We just let them know like, okay, this is a customer preference test, where we show our appreciation to them for taking the time to spend with us. And then there are kind of some guidelines and rules that we like to set up when we go into those. But essentially, we let them know that, like, this test is all about you, what you think about what you're seeing on the page in front of you, and just let us know when you move to the next page. There's no right or wrong answer. Feel free to tell us, whatever you think about this page, even if you think it's going to hurt our feelings. We got pretty thick skin, but a lot of time we'll do that, and then during that time as they're going through that, if they do ask a question, we let them know up front too that, like, if you ask us a question, then we'll throw that question right back at you and say, well, what do you think? Because we want this feedback from them to be as raw and authentic as possible, so then we're not influencing them in any way, but they're completely interpreting what they see in front of them for the first time.
Awesome.
I'd add that the voice of the customer conversations that we have are a little more structured. There's typically, like, we're trying to get answers to 4 specific things. And they're basically, what do you think about this feature? Is this something that is meaningful to you, that actually solves a problem for you? Or really, what is the problem that you have that we should be solving with this thing or something? We ask about what exactly it should do. And we also ask about what it's competing with. And that isn't necessarily just other products that it's competing with, but what is competing with your time? A lot of times we hear, like, this would be an awesome feature if I just had time to do it. Well, what are you doing when you're not doing this, when you're thinking about this thing? And then also, like, how would you want to be made aware that this thing exists? So voice of the customer calls are pretty structured. When we get into the customer preference test with the prototypes, usually we come into it with a handful, 3 or 4 things that we really want to dig deep on and make sure we get the right information about, that we can make a decision and get unstuck in a particular area. And that changes over the course of an experience, right? So if we do Sometimes we do 50 or 60 calls on a particular experience that we're building. At the very beginning, we're asking questions about some pretty high-level big stuff. At the end, we might be looking and nitpicking on details. So 1 or 2 calls after each other might be pretty similar, but if you look at the first call and the last call over that cycle, they're completely different. We're asking completely different questions, so it evolves as the prototype does.
There's a technique here, though, that I've observed as I've watched these videos, the recordings, because they don't like put a design in front of them and say, okay, this is a new feature we just built, and here's how it's supposed to work, and like, you know, what do you think? It's not like that. It's very much you put this thing in front of them and they say, so what do you see? You know, like, walk me through like what you see here on this page, and it's very interesting because they're kind of guiding the customer a little bit, but they're not seating the customer with like really. Can you talk more to that? Like, is there more to it than what I just said? Or
I would love to give you more time to talk about that,
is it
but
time?
we are out of time. But we really appreciate all of the information that you have given us. I'm gonna slap down right there just a little bit.
Slap down. Good job, man. Good job.
That's probably the only time I'll ever get to say that to a CEO. On stage, mind you. But we're going to clap for these guys. So,
Thank you.